Well, welcome back to the Azure podcast. This is episode number 480, being recorded on the 1st of December, 2023. Today we have Mark Eisenberg, our special guest, who's joining us on a kind of like a panel discussion on all the news that came out of Ignite. There's actually a website called the Book of News, which they produce every year around this time, and that's the one that we'll just quickly go over to see all the Azure-specific updates that are of interest to our listeners and to get them caught up on everything. So this is going to be an all news and some opinion from Mr. Eisenberg, who always has opinions on everything Azure related. Uh, all right, so let's go dive right into it because this is all about the news, right? And we can start with some of the AI services, which I think fair to say that's the big kahuna this year is the AI services. Everything's AI.
Yeah, we sprinkle AI on everything, man. No, there's actually a lot of good stuff here with AI. I'll go through some of these updates here. Obviously, the AI offering has expanded quite a bit from our initial stuff with Azure Machine Learning, with the Copilot stuff and all the different integration into different Azure services. So I'll kind of go through these quickly because there's a lot. As Sujit said, AI is quite hot right now from a technology standpoint. So from an update perspective, looking at the actual machine learning platform that we've had before in Azure, there's been some enhancements to that to include things like prompt flow that allow developers who are working on LLM workflows and designing these kind of things along with the prompts and the tooling that goes along with that, like our CLI SDKs and things like that. So there's a thing called prompt flow that's now GA. So I assume that was in preview before, but it's actually GA and machine learning now, and it's in preview in the AI Studio tool. There's a model catalog that basically allows users to fine tune their models again. So these are kind of more like tooling around that, not part of the developer thing, but more like on I'd say more like the research and the people who are building these actual AI models around that. There's a few other things like the model as a service, inference APIs, which is something that's coming to preview here soon. They talked about it at the conference a little bit, and this has to do with some foundation models, like that were coming from Meta and from outside and things like that that are being collaborated in the open source community, and not having to deal with things like GPUs and things like that. And OneLake is now in preview as a data store for machine learning. So that wraps it up on the machine learning platform. I mentioned before. Oh, sorry.
One thing I wanted to just say, Cale, on that
Yeah.
is that, this model as a service, one of the things I learned about the models is that they are just friggin' huge, right? They are in the, I don't know, is it gigabytes size and whatnot. So just, for individuals to have to deal with models is maybe a little too much. And that's why, we're providing some of those models through the model deployment in the AI Studio. And also, if there are third-party models like the ones you mentioned from Meta, the Llama 2, et cetera, we can now provide them as a service, right? So that this way they're easily available to use. Otherwise, you have to kind of hassle about, how am I going to make this model available? How am I going to update it and whatnot? And this kind of takes away some of that complexity.
Yep. I mentioned a little bit there earlier about the AI Studio. So Microsoft's launching a preview of what we're calling the Unified AI Platform, which will be formally called Azure AI Studio. And this is basically going to allow developers more tooling around how to shape these things and kind of build these. It's being designed, as you can tell from when we say unified AI platform, is kind of a one shop stop for the tooling, right? So it allows you to not only be able to build these things but test and deploy those. Basically this is kind of more for developers. It also allows users to like pick backends like from Fabric and the AI search, all kinds of different like components that we have inside of Azure. So think of this, and this is going in preview, by the way, as I mentioned. Think of this as the kind of one place you'll go in the future to help build, things in AI that we're talking about here. And this again is using the Copilot stuff is inside of there. There's customization in there with tools and models and the things Sujit was just mentioned about. So just think about that, bringing that all together. That's where you're going to go. Something else that's important and we've been talking about a lot at Microsoft is kind of the next thing here was around what we call CCC, which is the customer copyright commitment. And this has to do with around basically being able to handle copyright infringement that takes about when we start talking about copilots and AI and these different types of services. When you think about it, AI is built on top of these models that's using some of this data that may be under copyright, things and other kind of regulatory pieces around those that information. And so this is something that Microsoft's been pretty passionate about making sure that we do this right. So it has at Ignite, they announced the expansion of this customer copyright commitment to customers that are using our OpenAI service. So basically, I think in a nutshell, this boils down to some new documentation around the technical bits when people were actually doing this to mitigate any problems or risks around copyright infringement or this kind of content violations that could happen. This is also part of the Azure AI content safety, which is now generally available. And again, this helps detect and fix anything around the content and online experiences people are using with the AI services that we have.
With this one, I wonder if this is comes into play when you use when if you're inferring over your own data, right? Then your data is hopefully already pretty clean, so there's not going to be that conflict. I think this is coming when we do a hybrid search, right? Where you take your data and do a hybrid overlap with what's maybe the Bing crawler has provided, and that together may cause a problem, or whatever the GPT-4 model already has picked up when it was trained.
Yeah, as you said, when it's all inside your four walls, all your data, obviously there's no issue there, but it's public data, right? When you start bringing in things that are you don't necessarily own, right?
Yep.
Moving on here, there's a bunch more here. The AI vision is more around, and we've had this stuff for a while with the kind of vision tools. What did they call that before?
It used to be cognitive services. It was all under
services.
that bucket.
Yeah.
I think they've kind of moved all of that slowly under AI now.
Yeah.
Because they're all machine learning models anyways. Huh?
Slowly?
Slowly.
It
this
seems
time
like
it was. They just
been
rebranded them overnight. Yeah, it
Yes,
wasn't all that
exactly.
slow.
No, but the fact is they've been out there for a while. I mean, it's been years, right? With those tooling out there, and I'm sure they've, over the years have gotten better. Obviously, as AI has exponentially gotten, higher fidelity and better things with it. But some new updates to specifically to the vision piece, which deals with around, analysis of images and text and like OCR type stuff, facial recognition, those kind of things around imaging. So basically, there's been some updates to the Vision SDK, obviously, and this is, you can read about it. We're going to link to these kind of things, but basically, it's to recognize and prevent some of the spoofing attacks and things that are going on in there, and they lay out some of the specs around that. There's a new API. I think I don't know the version numbers at this point, but it's called Image Analysis 4.0. Which basically is around the OCR, object detection, those types of things. So that's generally available now. So this image analysis 4.0, which gives more enhanced OCR and better, accuracy, things like that. And then there's the this Florence Foundation model, which has been trained with a lot of text image pairs around like recognizing what an image is and what the text that goes along with that is. I think it's in the billions that this thing's been done. So back to Sujit's point about these models being huge, this is a model that's being used for the vision tool that's also GA as this release.
I read somewhere, I heard somewhere that it was the capture tool that we all used before for when we try to log into websites or something. It asks you to enter. So that actually is offered. That was that the results of those capture tools have been used to train some of these models as well, because people have actually entered it in, and so they actually have a real feedback on what what that number should look like, and so a lot of that goes into training some of these models here.
So we were actually training it all along.
We've all been training. It feels like the Matrix a little bit, but yeah. Cale, I can cover some of these next sections over
Sure.
here
Yeah.
on DALL-E. So I think the DALL-E 3. This is the next evolution of our image generation. You just provide text, and it'll create an image that represents what you've asked for. Of course, GPT 3.5 Turbo and is now expanded to 16K tokens, so that allows some more kind of enhanced data sets to be analyzed or to be inferred over. Also, GPT-4 is available. That's the latest LLM model that we have. And interestingly, now GPT-4 can be combined with that AI vision service that you just talked about, Kel. And so when you kind of combine the two, you get some nice magic. Like, for example, it can provide images that are related to the text that you're asking for, right? So you give like a nice multimodal output for the user. And of course, the GPT-4 updates keep coming along fast and furiously. Of course, developers are all looking to take advantage of this, and so there's you could program these models in all sorts of languages these days. Python is obviously the most popular one, but there's all the other languages are supported as well. Let's see what else we got here. There's a whole lot over here. The AI video indexer. That's one. I think we've had that on the show before, right? I believe.
Yep.
And so that's been kind of enhanced now. Essentially taking advantage of the Gen AI to create summaries of videos, right? So you have the video, the text, and then you can summarize it for you. So it uses the LLM for that, and also use the LLM to kind of search for video content, right? If you want to search for something that happened in the video, you can actually search for that using.
So that first
research,
one, that first one's not like closed captioning. It's more like it's looking at the video and describing it back to you in text form.
Yeah. It's to find certain maybe there was a sign in one of the videos
Yep.
or something
Yep.
like that, right? It can kind of extract some of the text from there and
Yep.
provide some more context.
Yep.
Well, what about AI search? Have any of you guys used that? Or the cognitive search? It used to be called, cognitive search. We've been doing a lot of work with it, and it's really come a long way. I think search service has always been, you just give it a bunch of documents, it will index it, and then you can quickly search them, right? They've added vector search to that, right, which is the new thing. And so by using vector search, now you can now search the index using the nearest neighbor algorithm of one of the LLM, the embedding model. So you create an embedding and you say, okay, I'm looking for things that match these set of embeddings, and so then using that the nearest neighbor search algorithm or whatever the algorithm you decide, it will find all the documents that match yours. So it's supposed to be a little more. It gives you results that are more than just keyword searches, right? It gives you results that are contextual to what you're typing, and understands kind of the text and gives you results that are a little more meaningful, especially if you add the semantic re-ranker or the ranker on top of it. It'll re-rank the results and give priority to the ones that are most likely to kind of meet your need there.
And this vector stuff scales better, is that right? Like from what I understand, it's faster, like more efficient, those kind of things. It scales better.
Yeah, I mean, vector search is fast, but at the same time, because it's doing the embedding model, it's also more complex, right? It has to, so that's part of the thing. It is going to need that access to the ADA embedding model, right, to be able to convert those the text to embeddings, pass the embeddings to the vector search system, and then get the results back from. Fortunately, the vector search in Azure is kind of, it's built in. It's there's no additional cost for it other than the normal search costs. But you still have to make that call to the vector search, and yeah, I think it's pretty fast that way. It's just that you're going to have that additional hop for creating the embedding, so you're going to have to make that call to the ADA model to do that.
Cool.
So this makes the RAG pattern better, right?
This makes the RAG
RAG
pattern exactly. Yes,
Right.
especially when you have your own data, right? This is most relevant if you're trying to reason over your own data. So
Right.
you kind of ingest that data into Azure Cognitive Search using whatever indexer mechanism you want to through blob storage, Cosmos DB, SQL, etc. And then you can do all these queries from the chat prompt, right? The Gen AI prompt or whatever you want to call that, where you can get the input from the user, you convert the embeddings, do the query, and then
Right.
get the results back.
And that is the bulk of what I'm seeing my customers doing at this point, putting that forward. And I grinned because you said reason.
Yeah,
No worries.
and I mean, yeah, go ahead, Cal.
Yeah, I was gonna say we got a lot to cover here, but I just wanted to touch on two things on the compute side, if we can move on to that.
Sure.
Just real quickly on that, just two updates here, and these are mostly around the actual virtual machine compute. So there's the latest AMD VMs that are built on this EPYC processor. So this is the fourth generation now. Basically, there's a preview for the DE and F VM series. I know there's so many in the alphabet here now that we have, but that's generally been around like figuring out exactly what your workload is and like what you need to be optimized for. And these expand on that, right? So basically, you have stuff that's more, this is mostly around memory to core count. So if you need something that like needs a lot more memory but less cores, like less compute but actually more memory heavy, then there's stuff that's more medium based, and then there's stuff that goes the opposite way where you have more compute versus memory, where you have that kind of scenario. And there's a couple different SKUs inside of each one of those letters I mentioned. We'll put the link out there for that. But basically, AMD's been expanding in Azure. We originally had all Intel stuff, right, and then the AMD stuff came along. I think we had last time the third generation EPYC processors. These are now the fourth generation. And again, just giving more flexibility so you can kind of size exactly what you need for your application size and keep it in budget,
Do customers actually care or really ask for a specific CPU? I don't know. I wonder often if they really care at that level.
I think it depends on what you're doing. I'll let Mark comment there too. But like, for some applications, I see a lot of that where like people don't care as much to what Sujit's saying, more like they have some limits around like how much memory they need or how much CPU they need generally. But then a lot of things can fill that void, right? But then there's some that are like, especially when you get into AI and things like this, where that could end up costing you a lot of money, especially if you're spinning up a bunch of VMs and things like that, if you're not using like platform services type stuff. And in that case, it does make a big difference, right, from a cost perspective to know
So
exactly. Yeah.
So that's the key. These are lower cost SKUs.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's fun. I started my sales career with Intel, and AMD was always that, in second place. And it's kind of sad to me to see that, yeah, we're introducing AMD specific SKUs because they're cheaper, which has kind of that's been their story for, for 30 years. So, but yeah, that would be the only thing I would see is if you're really trying to optimize for cost and you can live with whatever the deltas are between the two, then that would make a lot of sense. But that's where they would care.
Yep.
Then, of course, I spend a lot of time trying to convince people that going into the cloud to save money is not really your ideal scenario.
Awesome. One other
I
thing
would.
sorry, go ahead, Sujit.
No, Kayla, I was going to say, in the interest of time, maybe we can jump ahead to
Yeah.
the
Go ahead.
confidential computing section over here.
Well, you don't want to talk about SAP?
Oh, we have some
We
big
have
VMs
to.
for SAP, the M series. We'll put it in the links.
Yeah, we've
Anyway.
talked about them in the past, but yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so I wanted to kind of start. There was a session that Rusinovich did. I think it was actually identified as the third keynote. It's called Inside Microsoft AI Innovations with Mark Rusinovich. If you're really into this confidential computing stuff, I really recommend you take that in. It's got the AI improvements as well, as you can tell from the title. But yeah, his presentation is always top notch and goes into a lot of detail. It's very cool to get into. What I'm observing here is that, we went in to announce the preview with the confidential containers. One huge issue I've had working with customers on architecture is they want to use namespaces in Kubernetes as a security boundary. And the problem with that is it's not. We are I've sat through the whole presentation in front of a customer. We are doing the right things to create confidential containers and pods. The caution that I throw out on it is that the level of management effort that goes into it, particularly if you're trying to migrate an existing application into Kubernetes that's used to being able to talk to whatever it wants to talk to, now you've got all of these barriers in between the pieces of your application. So it's good for migration, but it comes with a cost, as it were, because you have to really, your automation gets more complex to deploy this stuff, to make sure all the paths that you need connected are there. But it will fill this need that particularly a lot of ISVs are going through right now. And then in general, like I said, I'm going to defer to Mark's presentation on most of this stuff. The CPU itself has been a big gap in the security story, because, you know, basically for a CPU to work with something, it's got to get decrypted. And if you can get in there, the techniques that Intel and others are building into the processors now, it still winds up decrypted inside. It's just way harder to get in there, and you can make sure that the data is coming from who you thought. And that to me was the big thing. The containers one was the big deal for me in the CI realm.
And is the focus on confidential compute, is that coming more from because you know, the cloud is generally multi-tenanted and people want their own little carved secure space, or is it more they want more security even in that realm?
Yeah, one's a good word. It's, for instance, I've been talking to some people about man-in-the-middle attacks, people who know more about security than I do. And I was like, anybody ever documented an actual man-in-the-middle attack? Okay, I can't find it. And there was a guy who said, yeah, I know where it is. And then I went back to him and I said, do you have that? And he goes, oh, I can't find it. So there's a lot of theoretical security vulnerabilities, whereas the big security vulnerability seems to be unpatched servers when we've actually discovered an exploit. But to your point, yes, a lot of customers want this capability. From a theoretical perspective, like I was saying before, the data is not, it's in the clear when it's inside the CPU. And if you compromise the CPU, you've got the data at that point. So that's the super secure people. The challenge I have with it is that it starts to distort Azure more and more to try to add these capabilities and manage these capabilities. And, you know, if your attack surface is, you know, is really, really tiny, is it worth what you're doing there? But for the people who want it, we now have it. Yes, Cale?
Yeah, just to add one thing on to the confidential compute, the containers piece. It kind of dovetails about the AMD piece, right? So historically, so these are using these enclaves, right, inside the VMs to do this kind of stuff. Historically, Intel has been kind of the one who started that, right, with the SGX processors that they did. These are powered by the stuff that you'll see in these confidential containers things. So basically, it's Kubernetes, and underneath the VM scale set, the VMs that are actually powering it are running these AMD processors that have this SEV capability, which is similar in concept to what SGX was, but it's different, right? So the big difference being SGX was more like app level, right? So I build my application with these APIs and Intel has these specific hooks in there for me to say, hey, I'm going to talk to this thing in the enclave, and then I'm going to do something and get it back out. So we have the host and we have the enclave, where the AMD one's like the whole VM, right? And that's what makes it, you know, compelling for something like Kubernetes, because the whole VM now is the enclave, right? Like thing, it's protected that way, as opposed to just the app level. I just wanted to like let our users know, or listeners about that.
Sure. Right. But again, the complexity, right, of managing all of that.
Yep. All right. Yeah, I think we've got a lot more. So let's jump into some of the data highlights real quick over here. Yeah. So there's a couple of bunch of shortcuts that have been created. So our data strategies are also around Fabric now. So that's the big term. And under Fabric, we have all the data capabilities. They've created these shortcuts to help us connect to, for example, Amazon S3 buckets from our data lakes here, or also expose the buckets, the data lake to other clouds itself. So they want to make sure that the connection is both ways. So there's shortcuts that have been made available. They've lowered some of the pricing for Azure SQL database, especially on the hyperscale compute layer. And so Managed SQL now also has a free trial offer available. It used to be just for the regular SQL, but now Managed SQL has it as well. And let's see what else we got here. I'm just going to run through some of these things real quick. Yeah, we talked about the Fabric being the new all-in-one system for data. Let's see. Yep, they've got the Microsoft Copilot for Azure Cosmos DB now available. So you could point your Copilot to your Cosmos DB database, and it can answer all sorts of questions about what you got in there. Also, there's the Cosmos DB from MongoDB now. So if if you want to make it look like you have a MongoDB database, you can kind of do that. And we talked about vector search in Azure Cognitive Search. It's also available in Cosmos DB now. Cosmos DB is also a vector search database. So a lot of different options our users have for in terms of data and databases. Let's see what else is of interest over here. Yep, we got new Azure Postgres SQL, which we're seeing a lot of. A lot of my customers use Postgres SQL in Azure. They seem to love it, and they're putting a lot more effort into that, more performance, more scalability options, which is great. And also there is an extension for Postgres SQL for Azure AI as well. And so you could kind of point your LLMs to it, to the Postgres SQL, and do lots of fun things with it. So I'm glad that is continuing to be rolled out. What is Azure Boost? I just saw this over here. Anyone know about this? Azure Boost. It says
no. Sorry.
It enables greater network and storage performance at scale.
Oh yes, Mark talks about that in his. It's hardware assist for storage and networking. It's pretty impressive. He runs a quick demo to show you the improvement. It's like 5x performance improvement. So, and it also, a lot of the existing infrastructure, storage is the easy one because you run through a virtual driver that then runs out to the physical device. Once that's established, now with these hardware paths, you can actually go right from the VM directly to the physical device. But it's all still virtualized. It's just being assisted by the hardware networking, something similar.
So that's something different from the like we had some network performance enhancements with specific VMs in the past using FPGAs.
Right.
To kind of offload
yeah, it's
that
the
stuff.
same ID.
Yeah.
It's just that it's the new one, and I guess we put a brand on it.
I got you.
That's how we roll.
Nice. I like the name Boost, man. Who doesn't?
Yeah, it's good. It actually fits. Yeah. So about the time everyone's using it, I guess it'll be time to change it. But for now, we'll run with it.
Yeah.
So again, Azure Chaos Studio, which we've talked about before, is finally GA, and so all of those experiments are available for customers to use, and you can go in the portal and try and see if your infrastructure and your applications are resilient. So that's good to see. Okay,
that's in which section? Where are we looking at that?
That was down in.
Okay,
management and
1.6.2, yeah, more like operations. Right. Yeah. There were some other operational related things. Anything that you guys want to touch on before I move on to DevOps and data and dev?
Let me do the infra thing real quick. In two different keynotes, we will introduce in the first one and talked about in the second our new custom AI processor, which will be available in Azure going forward. And then Mark goes into some of the performance improvements. I think if I'm remembering the numbers correctly, we've got training GPT-3 to do a training session, which used to take, I believe, weeks, now takes 4 minutes for GPT-3. Now, he didn't have any data for 3, 5, and 4. But yeah, we are definitely throwing, I don't want throwing hardware is like a pejorative, but we are optimizing the hardware to solve some of these hard problems, because the deficiency with GPT is it'll always tell you, right, that I was last trained at whatever time. And, you know, because we were looking at September of 21 for all the data, which if you were a developer, like I think we all are, you know, .NET 6 and 7 both came out after that training date. So to get these training times down to something practical will impact the usability of the tools.
Right.
So I wanted to throw that in there.
Does that, so just maybe you know more about this. So those new processors, they're not something that like people can see in like a VM or something. It's only platform like level services is where they'll get those enhancements and be able to use these things. And yeah,
I'm not clear on that because
Yeah,
they are optimized for AI, and we have a lot of customers doing AI workloads. So I'm not sure that we would limit it to just us, I think was what you're implying there, right?
yeah, I thought, and it wasn't on a Microsoft site. I think this was on an external site when that announcement was made. I think it was like a month ago or something, like publicly about these processors. It mentioned something about like it was like in these platform services. So I was like, oh, maybe it's like an option you can select in our platforms. I don't know. So maybe we'll have to dig into that in a future podcast.
Right.
Yeah.
Sure.
All right. I'm going to jump into some of the developer tool updates. There's a few of them that might be of interest to our listeners. So Azure Migrate has always been a tool that we've had to allow to make it easy for you to migrate your infrastructure that you have on premises to Azure. And now that's been expanded to also have code and application. And Mark, I'm pretty sure you've seen customers who go through this cycle about 22.
No. No one's ever tried that.
So apparently this thing will analyze your code and applications and we're going to give you, okay, here's a list of changes you probably want to consider to make it more effective in the cloud, or, you know, make it more cloud native or whatever. I suppose .NET and Java, of course, is the primary candidates here. And it's just kind of enhancement over what we used to do with Azure Migrate, which is just infrastructure. Now it's infrastructure, application, and code assessments, kind of all three in one. Yeah.
But I have to comment, my friend. You used the word easy.
Please do.
Don't do that. These
correct.
Things make it easier. They do not make it easy. There's a lot of work to be done to get this right. There's no easy button. As much as our customers want it, it doesn't exist, and it's not going to exist.
Right. It's still going to be at least give them an inventory of everything that they have.
Yes,
I'm hoping
exactly.
that it does provide like a report
Right.
of some sort they can prioritize and things like that. Yeah, that's
right. But you know, I'm on a crusade to stop with words like easy.
Yeah,
or
fair
simple.
Fair enough.
Or don't worry about. That's another phrase in the dev realm that I want to ban. Don't. So the developer doesn't have to worry about. I'm like, yeah, that always turns out well.
The Azure Container Apps is obviously our big focus these days for developers to quickly get their containers out there. And they've added, of course, as you can expect, dedicated GPU workload profiles now, so you can run training of your data. If you have a container that has that, you can target those profiles. We've talked about landing zones before, and landing zone accelerators. They have one for container apps as well now. So if you are deciding to use container apps and you want to deploy it in a really secure or kind of lockdown manner, you could use some of these landing zone accelerators. Previously, if you had to get your app to an app container app, you had to create the container, push it somewhere, and then make it available to the container apps. Now you don't have to. You can kind of jumpstart. You can kind of shortcut that. If you have the app can be directly pushed to container apps. And so it does those intermediate steps for you, I guess, as part of the process of creating.
So you don't have to worry about it, right?
So you don't have to worry about it and make it easy.
The problem is IT pros, that's their job to worry about this stuff.
Exactly.
You can worry a little less about it. We'll
okay, that's good. Okay, yes.
Exactly. And then vector databases are all the rage these days, as you all know. And so there's some open source vector databases that are now made available as add-ins to Azure Container Apps. So you can kind of make them available, just like you have plugins and things like that. There's ways to add these vector databases. The ones suggested are Qdrant, Milvus and Weaviate. Can't say I've used any of them. Azure deployment environments. That's another nice service that Azure has. Quickly, you can create these pre-built ARM templates, which have been vetted and everything, and users can spin up and spin down these environments as they need to. And one thing that we've always had the Azure Developer CLI, the AZD CLI, which is the Azure Developer CLI available to us, which did something similar from the developer perspective, right? You could create this little YAML file with some dependencies, and it would then kind of push this thing to Azure. So they've kind of combined the two services now, so you can actually use the AZD to deploy to an Azure deployment environment, right? So your kind of the two concepts are merged because they sort of do the same thing from different perspectives. One does it more from a developer perspective. The other one does it more from maybe somebody who's at the portal that want to do it from an infrastructure perspective. And also what they've added to with this development environment, the deployment environments, you can auto expire them now. So very often you kind of spin it up and you forget it's there. It's just burning CPU and costing money. It'll automatically get deleted after a particular time. .NET 8 came out just earlier this week. I saw the announcement and been digging into it. A lot of great updates from Gaurav. He sent out that lovely blog post. We'll put a link to that in the show notes. But that's now available in Azure Functions, both for Windows and Linux. So it's really nice that they move fast on that.
Is this the first time we did zero delay? There was no lag. There was no lag time on it.
It seems like that. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I know that's been an ask in the function space for a while. So yeah, if we've got that workflow worked out, that's a good thing.
Indeed. Yep. And when you come to functions, they've always had the serverless option, and then they had the kind of the self-hosted, like the option where you have all of the bells and whistles. But now they've got this one sort of like a hybrid of both, right? They call it the flex consumption plan. So it's a serverless consumption plan, but it still gives you things like your private endpoints, availability zones, things like that, right? So you can kind of get a little bit of the best of both worlds, so to speak. You don't have to pay for that dedicated plan, app service plan. You still can get pay as you go, but you still get some of the features that you would like to have from a security.
It's isolated. It's an isolated environment within.
It's an isolated from a networking perspective, but the compute and all is still dynamically kind of wired up as you need it. Good. Yeah. So that's it. And then AKS, of course, all of the development these days is in AKS, as well as our AI development. Like we talked about container apps, but most of our customers use AKS for security reasons. They prefer that posture currently. And so there is the new Kubernetes AI toolchain operator, which is released for AKS. And that lets you kind of give you like commands, easy commands. Sorry, I didn't use the word easy. Convenient commands. Convenient commands to deploy specific LLM models and manage them on your cluster, make them available to applications, etc. And what this does do, one of the kind of benefits of using AKS for this is that demand for GPU VMs is very, very high these days, right? And very often you're not going to get the CPUs that have high number of or the larger GPUs, but you do get the availability for CPUs with a lower number of GPUs is fairly available across regions. And now you can kind of use AKS to say, okay, I want like a node pool of like 100 nodes, spread across all these low-level GPUs, and then kind of spread your training or whatever across all of them, right? So that's the kind of workaround to the GPU demand problem these days. So yep. And then AKS also has this thing called Fleet Manager. Again, if you have a lot of AKS clusters, you're going to quickly lose the sight of what version of software is deployed where. And so the fleet manager lets you manage that from a central perspective, right? It says, okay, I want this particular Helm chart, to make sure that it's deployed across all these clusters. And if there's an update, it gets kind of, it's updated across all of them. It's not like, some of them got updated and some of them are on the old version and whatnot. So it kind of does that very deterministic rollout of updates across all of your AKS clusters. Any thoughts on that, Mark? On what are you seeing on AKS and just generally out there?
A mess, chaos.
It's a lot of chaos in there. Yeah.
There's, and you and I have been talking about this for years, right? That it's kind of where, and I've gotten this. Why are you doing AKS? Well, because isn't that what everyone's doing now? Which is not a great reason to pick a technology. And then I'm still seeing it as, it's a technology, containers to start with, which are fundamentally about, application architectures and the needs of developers. And then in the enterprise, it gets yanked by the infra teams, which is fine if the two teams are collaborating. And I'll comment at the end on, with the platform engineering and DevOps and all that. And it's gone exactly where we expect. It's way too complex. It's just another abstraction layer that's just jacked the complexity up. And so things like what were you just calling it? The command center thing. Sorry.
Fleet manager.
Fleet manager.
Deployment.
Thank you.
Fleet manager.
The fleet manager. Yeah, it's a necessary thing. Once you've generated all this complexity, now we need another tool to try to pull it together, and it's good that we have it. I would encourage everyone to use this as a starting point, but then really work hard on simplifying, not making simple, but simplifying your environment as much as you can. I'm still kind of stunned, whether I'm looking at code or whether I'm looking at infrastructure, that people can look at that while it's still on the whiteboard and not go, no, there has to be a better way. They just plunge ahead with this ridiculous level of complexity. So I don't know if that's what you were expecting me to say, but that's my comment on this concept, that fleet manager is trying to address.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. I think customers, just by consensus, they feel like, okay, containers and Kubernetes is the way to go, and now they're trying to kind of restructure their entire organizations and IT departments around that, which at least we're supporting them in that journey. So I hope that helps.
By the way, fun fact, because I've been around Azure for a long time, and we had in the beginning, we had 1, 2, 4, and 8 core VMs. That was it. Then somehow we squeezed that half core thing in there, the A0. And I don't look at VM SKUs. It's not my space. So recently I did get pulled into a conversation, ironically, around Kubernetes. And I was like, do we even have the small core SKUs anymore? And we do. But I would love to see some statistics on how many of those actually get deployed, who's using them. Because that's the conversation you and I had around the time Kubernetes was coming up is, there are a lot of workloads, put it in a 1 or 2 core, VM, keep your costs way down and do the granularity. But no, now we're doing that same exercise, but we're doing it using Kubernetes and the challenges that go with that. But yeah, that was something I went through recently.
You're talking about like the auto scaling of these node pools and whatnot. If you use the smaller SKUs, scaling them out. Is that what you're referring to?
Even if you're doing it within a Kubernetes context, yes. But then, another term that's driving me up the wall is t-shirt sizing.
Mm-hmm.
And that was kind of how I got into looking at the VM core count, because basically your typical enterprise IT department will say you can use this one, and yes, this one, but there are 10 of them that you could have chosen from, but they've decided these are the ones that you can use. And it just constrains the flexibility of what Azure brings to the table for you.
Yep, I agree. All right, so I want to jump on a few more updates here in the dev space. So MQTT is a protocol that I think has become pretty popular these days with IoT. We've supported Azure, supported AMQP pretty well, and even the web sockets for communication. not as well as we would like. But now what they've done is they've created this MQTT broker in Azure Event Grid, and that would allow the IoT devices, et cetera, to directly kind of send their, or at least trigger PubSub notifications through MQTT, and then as a result we can take all that data and forward it on to Azure Event Hubs or all of the other Azure services, because we can just grab it from the MQTT protocol. Support version 3.11 and version 5 of the protocol. This does open up, like I said, for all of the IoT devices out there. I think this is big if you're in that realm. Oh yeah, and then with the advent of AI or Gen AI, of course, let's not forget we have Azure Communication Services, right? It's something I've used that a little bit for text messaging to offer text messaging and applications, but it also supports speech and call routing. And now if you blend the two, now you can do complete automated answering of questions and all through text. I know it's been around for a long time, but now it's because of the advent of Gen AI, we can kind of do that a lot more intelligently. Like as people are asking for, hey, I have this problem, how do I solve it? We can kind of really give them the answer they're looking for instead of diving through multiple menu levels and whatnot.
So this is more of like a commodity type service, because that seems like that was more bespoke or like something before where customers would want to build something that does that. Now we have a couple tools you can kind of layer in there with this communication server, and it basically kind of automates that whole thing.
Right, it just makes the whole IVR all of that a lot more easier to navigate for end users. Instead of they could just say this is my problem, and you're probably going to go to the place where your answer is going to be, or do they operate to the correct person at least?
Of course, we always just say, give me the operator, and then we go through. So
exactly.
I always give it a try, and then I get irritated and demand to speak to an agent.
That's exactly what I do too.
And you got to figure out which word do you say representative? Do you say agent?
No, in all seriousness, it would be interesting to see how this improves on that, because that is the thing. Mark's 100% right. Like people, you kind of game it after a while. You say, what is that keyword it's looking for to do that? And if we can get to the point where you don't have to guess that, that's awesome. Like it works.
All right. So the last thing I'll mention is on the Azure App Services. I think we've talked about that a little bit. It's let's not forget that that's kind of one of our original services that we had out there, and it's been enhanced in a few ways. One is it supports now single subnets. So in a single subnet, you can have multiple app services. It used to be that every app service would need its own subnet, and now you can share that subnet. So it makes the kind of administration of networking a little easier. Notice I said that. And then and then it supports web jobs on the Linux. So web jobs was always something that was only supported on the Windows version of App Service, and so now you have web jobs on Linux on the Linux app services as well. And there are so they've kind of opened up some of those things which are Windows only. It's now made a bit of Linux. Extensibility support is another one for third-party systems. And the one that I really like as a developer is now gRPC is supported natively in app services, right? It's becoming more and more popular as an API surface. And so glad that we support that first class instead of doing all sorts of hacks otherwise.
Yeah, well, for microservices, it's really the way to go. HTTP is too heavy for microservice to microservice communication.
Absolutely. Yep.
And Dapper makes it easy too. Yeah, it's great for Dapper as well, because that's a fit for it.
Yep, that's the internal way that Dapper communicates with each other. So yeah, there's of course a bunch of other updates on Microsoft 365 and other, I guess, products that are not directly related to Azure, which we'll put a link. Users are free to go and check them out. But I wanted to cover most of the Azure highlights. Anything else, Mark, Cale, that we may have missed and worth noting here?
No, I think it's good.
For me personally, there was new templates in the new Visual Studio for .NET 8 where you can just right from the beginning of the solution, have React and a .NET Core, ASP.NET Core backend integrated into the same solution. So that's another way that and that wasn't I think there's an Angular template as well. The React one is both JavaScript and TypeScript. So just in terms of making things easier, out of the box, we've added these kind of capabilities, and it demonstrates the commitment to open source.
Yep. And Mark, I just reminded about one thing. You had some thoughts about platform engineering that you wanted to share.
So to me, well, number one, Microsoft is 100% committed to platform engineering at this point. I'm still trying to suss out how we're defining it. If that's my whole thing, going back to the beginning, that we just keep defining things. Well, not we, the industry, any given actor chooses to define whatever it is technology we're working with in the way that works for what they're doing. So I suspect our platform engineering won't necessarily conform to what's coming out of the DORA reports. But to me, it's a continuum from DevOps to SRE, now to platform engineering. In my experience with customers, I'm kicking back on the platform engineering thing a little bit because it's being leveraged as a thing that IT uses to constrain what developers are able to do with their applications. And I've started an initiative that I call app architecture first, as opposed to infrastructure first, where Azure's fundamentally an infrastructure platform, and it's easy for us to talk about the infrastructure first, but we really need to be talking about application architectures first, and then build the infrastructure using the building blocks that make sense. And my concern about platform engineering is that enterprise IT shops will use it as a way to constrain what developers are doing, rather than engendering what is the most important part of DevOps, which is dev and ops collaborating, rather than one side or the other dictating. Usually it's IT dictating, or if it's a dev-dominated shop, it's build it here, make it work to the IT guys. So, and so I don't want more noise, and I'm a little concerned about more noise in the air around platform engineering, when the primary goal of getting dev and ops to collaborate better is really what we need to be focused on. So
yeah, I mean, and of course, we still have to worry about things like being secure and compliant and managing costs and all that, right? So I know, like, developers will will want an architecture that maybe comes out to be a little more grandiose, or maybe not possible to deploy, using a secure environment.
But that's the root of me kicking back against not worry about. Developers don't need to worry about. Okay, yeah, they do. Because when you're building an application, if you don't worry about it, then the infra guys have to do all this other stuff.
Correct.
And now all of a sudden you're constrained. So the collaboration is key. Right. So that you can talk about what needs to be done and why it needs to be done. And then you figure out the best how, rather than one side or the other dominating. So that's my thinking on that. But as Dennis Miller says, but that's just my opinion. I could be wrong.
I'm pretty sure you're right, Mark. But thanks again for all your insights today, and Cale, thanks for covering all of the compute topics in our Azure roundup today.
Yeah, thanks for listening, everybody. This has been a marathon. This is a big one.
It's a bit of a long episode, this one, but we had a lot to cover, and we still didn't get through all of them.
Yep.
All right. It was fun, as always. Talk to you next time.
Okay.